back to the Sport and Recreation Alliance Inclusivity podcast series. My name is Serena and I am the Governance Officer at Sport and Recreation Alliance. For South Asian Heritage Month this year, I am chatting to inspirational South Asian professionals working within the sport industry and showcasing their stories, experiences and advice. Last week, I spoke to Jatin Patel, who is the Inclusion and Diversity Director at England Rugby and is also a non-executive director at Sussex County Cricket Club. He spoke about his journey into the sport industry, his passion for rugby, and the importance of having role models. Please have a listen to that episode if you haven't done so already. But today, I have Yashmin Harun here with me. Yashmin is the chair and founder of the Muslim Sports Association, as well as being the chair of the Brentford and MSA Women's Football Club. Yashmin has held a number of board roles for organisations such as the London FA, the FA and British Fencing. So, Yashmin, thank you so much for coming in today to talk to me. I'm really looking forward to hearing about your journey within the sport industry.
Hiya, thank you for inviting me.
So, firstly, can you tell us a bit about your background to your career so far and your journey to where you are today within the sport industry?
Yep, so I played sports all my life, but it wasn't a career that I took. I've gone into banking. So I fell into sports again when I started missing the team sport, and I started my own sessions in basketball, and then that sort of grew into MSA. So we established MSA, which is Muslim Sports Association. In 2014, we started to grow as an organisation, and we got more and more sports involved. So it started with basketball, then badminton, then football. And then I started thinking, as I was going to all these networking events to see what the industry is like, it was very white, middle class. And I thought, they're making decisions on our behalf without engaging the community or talking to the community. And I thought, what can I do to import and add value to that to make make sports accessible for our community?
So obviously you mentioned there that the Muslim Sports Association started because there was people from white backgrounds who were making decisions on our behalf. How do you feel that sort of, as a Muslim female, how that has sort of impacted or maybe inspired other Muslim women in sports?
I think for a long time we've been the highest inactivity rates within sports, and I'm sure that's changed. I'm not sure who that survey goes out to or who, if it reaches the right audiences from Sport England. But I have seen the landscapes change since I've created the MSA. More women are involved in sports. They are more aware of what they need to do to keep healthy, and they're more aware of the impact it makes not on their physical health but also their mental health as well. So we do have more women playing in sports, especially from the ethnic minority backgrounds. But I think there is still that barrier, or there is that gap between the industry, the sports industry, and the communities that they classify as hard to reach.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that is? Why do you think organisations or the sport industry are still finding it hard to reach those communities?
I think there's a lack of communication. I don't think they're talking to the right people. They seem to want to take the sports to the communities, and they say, this is the sport, come and join us, rather than understanding what the barriers are and the challenges are for individuals within a community. So not all South Asian females have all the same challenges. Muslims will have one challenge, Sikhs will have another challenge, Hindus will have another challenge. And I think what they've done in the past is lump us all together and not diversified what those challenges are, or the lived experience as well, what lived experiences we have within the sports industry. They haven't fully understood that in the past. I think now they're starting to engage with little pockets of communities, and they're starting to understand it, but there is still a long way to go.
Absolutely, yeah. And you just mentioned there how obviously not all South Asian females have the same challenges, and that's something I wanted to ask you about as well. I guess, what inspired you to pursue a career in the field within sport industry anyway, but also did you face any challenges and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, so I was very sporty at school. I had the sport of my parents as well. So I did football, I did rounders, I did athletics. I was quite lucky in terms of I grew up in Scotland, so I had the opportunity to try lots of different sports. And then when I moved down to London, I went to an all-girls school. And again, I had the opportunity to do lots of sports. And then one thing that wasn't on the after-school clubs, it was football. So I started that with my business studies teacher, who was also a football coach. And we started that, and that slowly grew. But as I was leaving, I started it and then I left. Yeah. But it's still there and it's growing. But the challenge that I faced after school was that there wasn't clubs that would probably had players that looked like me, and I felt the space wasn't for me. It was inaccessible. There wasn't girls that wore the hijab. I would have had to wear jogging bottoms and long t-shirt, and a lot of the girls were wearing shorts. So I didn't feel that place was there for me to be playing, to continue playing. So that's why I chose a career in banking. I didn't understand what the other career opportunities there were within sports.
Yeah, so actually I wanted to touch on that a little bit, because you just mentioned there that your parents obviously were quite supportive, and I was going to ask you if you went into banking because that was something your parents wanted you to do, if it was, but it's nice to know that actually you did have support from your parents. And I guess with your banking background as well, from that sort of corporate side, how is there a difference? Can you see a difference between what the corporate sort of industry is like between the sports industry, and if there's any sort of discrimination against South Asians within that?
So when I first started out in banking, there was very few people that looked like me as well. I've been in banking for 25 years, so very few people that look like me. But as our community started to get more and more educated, more girls that looked like me were coming through, and that was really good to see. You know, I didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. There were people there. There were little networks happening within the banking industry that was, you know, you could join, and you had other people that you speak to. Things were changing in little things, even in terms of the menu in the canteen. You had halal food, whereas before you didn't. So things like that were changing, and then obviously ED and I became a buzzword within the sports industry. But there's still a long way off from where the corporate world is and where the sports industry is. I mean, quotas on boards is good, but it's not enough. There's still a long way to go. And that top-bottom approach is not affecting the way the participation level should be. It's not reflective of how society is. And I don't think that's happening fast enough.
And I was just going to ask you as well, I mean, often amongst South Asians that we have quite strong cultural ties and traditional values and stuff like that. And so how did you incorporate your South Asian heritage and the fact that, you know, you wear a hijab into your professional life, whether that's with banking or even in sports?
Yeah, I don't think in any situation I've compromised who I am. So my religion comes first, and the South Asian next, and that's who they see. So why should I be anything else? Obviously, I was born and brought up in the UK, grew up in Scotland as well, so I'm a bit of all over the place. But I was born in Manchester, so I have never compromised who I am, and I think I've always been quite vocal in terms of speaking on behalf of not only myself, but I also have a duty, I think, when I go into rooms where decisions are made, strategies are made, policies are made, that I do put forward our lived experiences as well, because that is something nobody else can put into that conversation. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely, yeah. And you also mentioned networks before, and I wanted to ask you as well, did you have any role models or sort of anyone that you kind of aspired to look at when you were going through, whether that's banking or the sport industry? Did you have anyone that you really wanted to aspire to be or taking?
So growing up, I loved football, but obviously it was the men's game. The women's game, there was Alex Scott and Rachel Yankee, but I was also very athletic as well, so I was a 100-meter runner. So a lot of the black athletes were really like positive role models for me, but I didn't have anyone from South Asian background. My mum and dad were my role models, my family were my role models. They always went against adversity, so whereas South Asian families would navigate towards South Asian communities, my dad always navigated to non-South Asian communities, like white communities. So I grew up in that areas, and we faced racism growing up, but my dad would always come out stronger, and we would always come out stronger and make friendships, and they would get to know us, and that sort of challenged or broke down the barriers of them getting to know us and us getting to know them. So that broke down that sort of like negativity they might have had towards us. But in terms of what I've done, sorry, what was the question again?
If there's anyone that you've aspired to look at, or anyone that's inspired you, really.
So in terms of inspiration, I think the people around me who've worked, they've inspired me because they've supported me. They've been my allies. They've spoken to me spoken about me and supported me when I've not been in the room, and that's really important. And they've put me in contact with the right people to ensure that MSA grows, but also as I grow as a person too.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously, the work that you do now with the MSA is incredible and super inspiring for so many young South Asian females. So do you now kind of see yourself as a role model for others? You might not tell yourself you're the role model, but can you see that sort of position that you're in now?
I don't see myself as a role model, but I hope I inspire lots of different girls to come into the sports industry, because there's more to just playing and coaching. And I think when we think about sports, even for boys as well, when we think about sports, we automatically think we have to be a player or coach. and there's more within the industry that's open for them. So if they want to be a doctor, they can be a sports doctor. If they want to be a lawyer, they can be a sports lawyer. If they want to be a physio, they can be a sports physio. So there's lots of different avenues within the sports industry that we don't speak enough about. And the more we speak about that, the more role models that they see within the industry, then they can aspire to that as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's really good to hear, first of all. And I just wanted to say as well, you've obviously taken up some board level roles. I mentioned the London FA, the FA and British Fencing. Could you just talk a little bit about how you kind of got into those roles and your experience within that sort of environment?
Yeah, I think very much my sports career was an accident because as I mentioned before, I went to networking events and people were making decisions on our behalf. And as I got more confident, I went into those rooms and I started challenging them. And then Kevin Coleman from the FA approached me and said, why don't you do a on-the-board program with the FA, which will get me board ready. And what that means is upskilling myself to become, get the skills and the insight and the knowledge to get on the board. So I took up his invitation and I did that, completed that. And then I did a leaderboard program with Sporting Equals as well. So I've got those two sort of like different board skills that I was able to upskill on. But also my corporate experience as well. And then they encouraged me to go forward for board positions. So I went for a few, got rejected, went for British Fencing, luckily got that one. And then for the FA, I joined as a council member first. I'm an elected director at the London FA. So I went in as a council member first. Took me a couple of years to get onto the director on the board as a director. But and that was again about building relationships, building rapport, because I had to be elected. So the council members at the time again were very white, middle class, older generation, and they didn't know who I was. They made an assumption as soon as I walked into the room whether or not I knew about football. And it was up to me to go down and challenge their thinking and change their way of thinking and making them understand that I knew about football. I could bring more skills to it. I could bring my insight and my lived experiences. And that was really important, that building of relationships.
And I think something that I've kind of been sort of questioning is when we do have, that sort of representation at board level roles, whilst it's all well and good that you're in that position, are you feeling that you can sort of give across your opinions and your ideas and you are being supported? And I think that's something that I've heard other board members in the past say, that it's amazing that I'm here in this position, but actually now I'm here, am I being heard? And I think sometimes they're not always being heard. I guess from your experience, would you say that you definitely have the support from those around you when you're in those, within your board, you do have that support?
Yeah, I think I've been quite lucky and I've been quite fortunate. I've had the support of the chair and the CEOs in both my board positions. And also at the FA, Debbie's been amazing, the chair of the FA. She's been really supportive. So I'm now a board member of the National Game Board as well. So, I've been quite fortunate and alhamdulillah, I've been able to get people around me who's believed in me. But I know there are people that get to that level and they can't make an impact. Whereas I've seen it from a different perspective. I've got a banking background. Sports is my secondary role, if you like. And I'm there to make an impact. I'm there to make a change. So I will challenge them. And if that's something that they don't like, then, they're going to either push me away or they're going to carry me to go forward. So that's the way I've seen it. And I know for a lot of people, sometimes the sports board roles or the sports workforce is all they have. Whereas I've got that fortunate position of I've got two roles that I have, and I'm there to make a difference. So I'm not going to quiet down and not make the challenge. I'm there to make the challenge and make them rethink and think about how are they engaging with the communities. If they do want to really be diverse, then what are they doing about that?
Do you have any advice for those that maybe are in board roles but obviously aren't being supported? I know you said you do have that support, but would you say to just sort of back yourself a little bit more, and if there's something that you really got on your mind, to just kind of say it and not worry about maybe what other people are thinking?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we do have is imposter syndrome. And I think once we get over that, once you're comfortable in the room, build those bonds with the people around the room as well. So other board members, get to know them, let them get to know you as well. And don't be shy, because at the end of the day, we're the only ones there who are going to speak on our behalf. If we don't speak on our behalf, nobody is there to do that. And we should challenge. We're there to check and challenge as board members and hold the whole board to account, the executive team to account. That's our role. And if we don't do that, we're not doing our roles properly, so we're not fulfilling that. So it's really important that you understand what the role of the board trustee is or director is, and then make sure that you do go forward, and be confident in yourself, because we know the challenges that we face, but also be confident in what the board should be presenting, what you should be have an oversight of, especially safeguarding, governance and things like that. Have that knowledge as well, because the more you learn, the more confident you can be within that room.
I think often we hear that for those from ethnically diverse backgrounds is that you kind of have to work sort of 10 times harder as your white counterparts. I think that's kind of something that you've just touched a little bit on there is, you know, if you've done all the work that you possibly can do, then, you know, you should have confidence in yourself that you can do the job well. And unfortunately, sometimes that's not always seen. But if you've got that within yourself, then obviously, you know, back yourself a little bit more and you can really make a difference. And just going back a little bit, actually, I want to talk about, you know, you mentioned how you've played football growing up and all these other sports. I guess, what do you think are the main challenges that are faced by ethnically diverse communities within the game, whether that's participating, spectating, you know, officiating, whatever it might be?
There is still discrimination within all sports, and I think that's something that is going to take a long time to overcome. But I think the greater representation we have as a community, we have to be hard within ourselves, you know, to have tougher skins. And unfortunately, I don't like to say it because we shouldn't have to, but that is the only thing that's going to get us through, is to have more tougher skin and not tougher skin, thick skin, to sometimes hear but not hear discrimination, and just go ahead and stay within the sports. Because if we go into the sports and get discriminated against, that's what they want. They don't want us in the game. So we have to carry on and make that change. And who's going to be the first person to make the steps of changing it for the next generation? We have to do that. Because generations ahead of us have gone through it, and they've unfortunately had to give up because it was so much. But this generation has an opportunity, and I think if we carry on, then it should make it easier for the next generation.
Absolutely. And I guess, again, you've mentioned how football is one of your favourite sports. Definitely within the women's game, I don't think we've seen a South Asian female play for England yet. I could be wrong, but I don't think we have. And so I guess, what's your opinion on that? What could, I guess, either the FA or is it women's football? Like, what do you think the reason is for that?
So they used to have the regional talent centres out in the sticks, like in the very suburb areas. We've challenged that, and they've changed it into bringing it into the inner city areas. So like, you know, it will be more easily accessible for diverse communities to go to, especially the young girls, because they couldn't travel an hour and a half to go to these places. So hopefully we see that pathway happening. It's going to take a little bit of time, but there are changes being made within the women's game. But it's unfortunate we do have girls within teams already who are not getting the opportunity to play with England. And that is something I think the FA needs to really look at and address sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Because as you just said, you know, the girls are there, they are playing football already. Why is it that they've not been able to make that step up into the international environment? And I think for a lot of, I don't know, you might not have an opinion on this, you might have an opinion on this. Do you think South Asian females who are playing the game, do you want to represent England, or do they want to represent sort of maybe their sort of background, if they're from India or Pakistan, would they prefer to play for England, or do you have any sort of opinion on that?
We have a young girl who's playing for Pakistan because I think maybe, I don't know her story, maybe she was overlooked by England, but she's a really good player. And I'm sure the girls here who are born and brought up, they see themselves as English. So why shouldn't they play for England? So the FA are working towards making it more diverse and making it more represented of our society. But there are certain challenges and barriers in the way that, you know, need to be addressed and need to be looked at before we can comfortably say that the England team is diverse in both the men's and the women's game.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about the next generation being a bit more, having tougher skin, etc. But what advice would you give to sort of the young people who come from diverse backgrounds, who obviously want to make a step into the sport industry? Again, whether that's as a professional, working behind the scenes, or as a athlete. Do you have any advice for young people?
I think taking that first step's really, really hard. But once you make that first step and you get through it, then you are inspiring a whole lot of other people behind you. So always think about that. If you give up, who are you letting down? You're letting yourself down maybe first. You're letting your parents down maybe second. But there's a whole lot of people that might be taking the same steps as you, and you don't want to let them down either. So think about what that first step means to a whole lot of other people and keep going, because it might not get easier, but you might make it easier for someone else. And that's really important. If somebody is not brave enough to make that first step to make a change, then that change will never come.
And I guess often in sort of South Asian communities, you know, cricket's kind of seen as the top sport. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I play cricket. So, but do you think sometimes that because of that, sort of South Asians are kind of maybe not taken into account when it comes to sort of other school sports, because they just assume, oh, you know, cricket's the sport for them. There's no point in them sort of coming into basketball or football or whatever. I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think we are pigeonholed. I think we're very, like, the stereotype is that we like cricket. And maybe football, but there's no opportunities within schools anymore where that's the first point where you will try a variety of sports. So sports needs to come back into schools and be an important part of the curriculum. PE is not seen as that, and all my opportunities came from school. I was given all the opportunities of doing athletics, doing high jump, doing hockey, tennis, you know, all the different sports. And I think that's really important that the government invests in the PE within schools, because that's where the opportunity starts. It's not mums and dads taking them to all 20 different after school clubs or, you know, leisure centres or anything like that. This opportunity at first comes within schools, and the government needs to do more and invest in that area.
Just going back again once more, you mentioned earlier about your parents being very supportive and stuff. Can you understand how many South Asians do have parents who aren't as supportive and sometimes try to get them to go into other industries, stereotypically such as medicine or law? But can you understand how, you know, that can be a big sort of barrier for South Asians in sports?
It can be because we don't have representation. So the parents obviously think, well, if nobody's made it before now, what makes it that you're going to make it? Yeah. So there's always going to be that mindset. But I think now with our generation, there's a lot more supportive parents. I mean, a lot of our dads take the girls to football and they're standing on the sidelines. And that's really good to see. It's not just the moms, it's the dads as well. And, you know, that mindset is changing even across all of our sports in MSA. It's the dads normally phoning me up and saying, can my daughter join? And I think that mindset is changing, the narrative is changing. And the next generation will be even more inclined to do sports. Yeah. But somebody has to make it at a professional level for us to break that barrier and then make it a viable option, a career option for us. I mean, cricket is where we've made it so far. Football, half-half. And other sports, not so much. Maybe tennis, but from another country, not from England. So, you know, until we still see more representation at professional level, parents are going to be a little bit resistant.
Absolutely. And you just touched upon MSA again. Did you just want to talk a little bit more about MSA and sort of, I know you mentioned you started in 2014 and how it's really progressed on. Just, you know, if you want to talk for maybe a minute or so, a bit more about MSA and how well you're doing.
Yeah, no, MSA is doing really, really well in terms of participation levels. We're very concentrated in East London at the moment, you know, Ilford, and we've got a great partnership with Friendfairs for our football. But we want to diversify and grow into across London, across England, into the Midlands, into North England as well. But we also have that impact of not only participation but also coaching as well. So we give our women the opportunity to do their coaching badges. And their mindset as well has also changed in terms of they become role models for their children, and especially when they become coaches, but also the mental well-being, the mental impact that we have. If they have a physical activity that changes and they feel physically well, they feel mentally well as well. And that impacts the whole family. And I think sometimes that is so undervalued within our community.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good to hear about all the good work that MSA are doing. And I think growing up, I wanted to play football, and I did have one slightly bad experience, and it kind of put me off playing it. I'm still a big football fan, but don't really play it as much as I would have liked to. So it's really good to hear that you've created that space for girls to come to and feel represented and feel comfortable playing football, which is really nice. And just one last question, if you don't mind. Ultimately, you know, what are your hopes for the future when it comes to diversity in sport, inclusivity as well? You know, what do you hope to see in the future?
There has to be people coming through the pathways, and there needs to be more positive role models being spoken about. We have a lot of people within football at grassroots level. They can be inspirational people, and they need to be spoken about a lot more. It doesn't have to be at the elite level. If we talk about these grassroots people a little bit more, then other children will be inspired that they can become coaches, they can become managers, and all the other sports occupations that you can get as well. They can be inspired to be that. But if they don't see it, they won't be it. So that's really important. But I hope to see a South Asian play for England one day, whether that's in the men's or the women's. I like to see representation across all the sports, and not just the major sports, not just cricket, not just football, but across all the sports. And I hope parents will now encourage their children to do the sports, because that's really important for their mental wellness as well.
Brilliant. Well, nice to kind of leave it on sort of a more positive note. Hopefully, in the future we do see that sort of representation at that higher level, and people like yourself who's continuing to do brilliant work. Hopefully we will get there one day. So thank you so much for coming in today and having a chat with me. It's been brilliant to kind of hear your experiences and the journey you've been on within the sport industry, and sort of thank you for doing the work that you do as well, because like I said, it will benefit so many other South Asian females. So if you're listening and you have any questions regarding this topic, please feel free to email governance@sportandrecreation.org.uk. Additionally, if you have any questions for Yashmin, you can contact her at info@muslimasports.org.uk. And finally, to keep up to date with the Alliance and all the great work that we do here, follow us on Twitter @SportRecTweets and Instagram @Sport and Recreation Alliance. Thank you for listening.